Hello there from the beautiful Ventnor on the south coast of the Isle of Wight. Just wanted to shoot a very short video about the kind of invasion, as I would call it, of non-native, as I would call them, Holm Oaks, a Mediterranean species, but the invasion of that species through the Isle of Wight Undercliff as kind of both as a cautionary tale in terms of assisted colonisation, which I'll come back to at the end of this video, of Mediterranean species into southern England, but also of the problem that the introduction of these species can cause existing habitats and ecosystems, in this case chalk grassland, special area of conservation, and SSSI, site of special scientific interest, chalk grassland. Directly behind me you've really got the source of the problem. I don't know how well you can see it. I'll drop in another video clip showing it a bit closer, but I think in the 1930s, a couple of sisters, I gather, planted loads of seedling Holm Oaks on the chalk grassland slopes, the southern slopes that kind of dropped down into Ventnor. And that was the source population. That Holm Oak planting onto chalk grassland has come to develop as a monodominant, a literally monodominant species, single species stand of Holm Oaks. They're now getting pretty mature and they're certainly producing a lot of acorns. It basically obliterated the chalk grassland that would have been there before, and that has become the source population for the incredibly successful and pretty rapid spread of Holm Oaks in a westerly direction, in particular through the undercliff of the Isle of Wight, including into calcareous grassland, chalk grassland, all owned by the National Trust. The Holm Oak Forest is now owned by the National Trust. So it's basically colonising open chalk grassland over there on Ventnor Downs, but it's also marching west through the undercliff against the prevailing wind. They're not wind dispersed Holm Oaks, into other areas of chalk grassland sites of special scientific interest, and some areas which are SAC, special areas of conservation as well, with early gentian and that kind of thing, UK endemic, little tiny obscure species. But basically they're able to do that because, primarily I think, because of jays. We get a huge number of migratory and dispersing jays here in the autumn, and they love Holm Oak acorns and they bury them throughout kind of any tussocky grassland, kind of open habitat throughout the undercliff and into woodlands as well, kind of into the leaf litter below woodland areas. And there are Holm Oak seedlings everywhere. So there are two Holm Oak seedlings there. Let's come this way a little bit. Hopefully the camera will track me, but directly behind me I think you can see those two Holm Oaks there. Directly above, which you can't see, but I'll drop in a video clip, there's a Holm Oak. That's a seedling Holm Oak. There's one over there, there's one over there. They're in every garden. You know, you can just about make out probably on this video the gardens behind me. And there are Holm Oak seedlings. When I say seedlings, you know, 10, 20-year-old things, you know, 10 metres tall, some of them, in every garden. And they're all beginning to produce acorns. And the jays absolutely adore them in terms of stashing them and hoarding them. But then they then grow. So now I'm going to go on and drop in a little clip from the site of special scientific interest up at High Hat, where there's been no deliberate planting of Holm Oak in that part of the undercliff, but it's marching through and it's obliterating more chalk cliff, chalk scree habitat full of rare bees. That's why it's a SSSI, and the plant communities as well. It's going to be completely destroyed over time, but I'll drop in a clip of that area now. So I'll make a quick comment directed at natural England. So we're on a High Hat, and this cliff top on the cliff face is all a SSSI, site of special scientific interest. And I assume either the farmer or the council have topped this area off on the top of the cliff, which is good for keeping the Holm Oaks under control. But on the slope, which is where all the valuable chalk grassland is, the SSSI chalk grassland and the Glanville fritillaries, they've not cut it. And this is where the real problem is occurring, where the SSSI is being invaded basically by this Holm Oak. You can see there's millions of seedlings. And so it's difficult. I'd have goats up here, but Whether they can do that feasibly, I don't know, but in order for the SSSI not to turn from chalk grassland, which is what it's designated for, or cliff face chalk. Oh, nice chiff chaff coming past. They're going to need to get rid of all this Holm Oak, because it's just turning into solid Holm Oaks as it stands. And Natural England have started to get on top of it by helping the farmer to cut some of the scrub, well, the Holm Oak, nice yellow hammer there. But a lot more work needs to be done. It needs to be done soon because the SSSI is getting destroyed by invading Holm Oaks. This all used to be completely clear along this cliff. Lovely yellow hammer there. Yes, I think Natural England needs a bit of a game plan for along here. It goes from here, the SSSI cliff top and cliff face, all the way along to High Hat, which is the peak over there. Beyond that, the invading Holm Oak isn't such a problem. So this is one of the main sections, and there's another section a little way along at High Hat where yeah, they're going to have to, Natural England is going to have to get its act together really and sort this out if we're not to lose a SSSI. Pretty unique habitat, this kind of inland chalk cliff, inland but still on the coast. So it's not the same habitat as the chalk cliff that's common on the island, the sea cliffs at the Needles, and because there's an undercliff below this one. So it's probably unique really. I mean, is it Folkestone Warren? Is that undercliff below a chalk cliff? Probably. But otherwise the Isle of Wight Undercliff on the chalk is pretty unique. So the SSSI interest here is pretty unique. You can just see how much Holm Oak is spreading into here. And this is superb old ancient chalk grassland full of rock rose and salad bonnet and, well, everything really. Adonis blues and chalk hill blues, loads and loads of chalk hill blue butterflies. You can just see that the chalk grassland down here. Just about see a kind of a relic chalk bit of it, just covered in rock rose. And these Holm Oaks here have been cut by, I think, the farmer with Natural England support, so they can do it. This is within the last 5 years this work was done. So Natural England could definitely get it done with the farmer. Just need to expand the programme and keep on top of the Holm Oak. This is another section that's a bit of a disaster from a SSSI point of view. It's all protected habitat that should be managed but isn't being properly managed because of cuts to the budget of Natural England. They just haven't had the resources to look after these places. And the current government, Keir Starmer's government, is worse than the previous one in terms of budget cuts, it would seem. Well, actually, that may not be true. We'll have to see how things develop. They've made some really good announcements lately, like beaver reintroduction is now formalised and you can now apply for a licence to release beavers into the wild. That's good news. Yeah, you can really see the Holm Oaks here. So it's quite a job. So basically to clear the Holm Oak along here would require tree surgeons with climbing equipment. So it's quite a specialist task, taking chainsaws and cutters down these steep slopes to get to the base of these taller Holm Oaks lower down, because they're all shading the SSSI, and they create much stiller conditions, which is what's enabling all this scrub to invade what was a windswept cliff face. So that's the point here. You know, Natural England could say, well, how are we going to graze it? It never used to be grazed. I mean, there used to be a few more rabbits on here, but really what's going on here is the Holm Oak. It's got really bad along here. This all used to be completely open, but the Holm Oak lower down the cliff face kind of grows up and shelters the top part of the slope from the winds, from the sou'westers, this is all hitherto exposed to, and that's what enables this invasion of seedlings of Holm Oaks right the way up the cliff face, right up to the top here. So back in the 90s, 2000s, this was completely open, and now it's solid Holm Oaks, and this is all site of special scientific interest. The interest feature being open chalk cliffs and green sand cliffs covered in chalk grassland in some areas and more neutral acidic grassland in other areas, and it's been allowed to be invaded by Holm Oaks and be destroyed. You can see here this is Holm Oak seedlings, but amongst the seedlings are loads and loads of rock rose and salad burnet. So this is chalk grassland that is just going to be destroyed by all these thousands of Holm Oak seedlings, and these adult, or these more mature Holm Oaks, are sheltering this slope from the prevailing southwesterly breeze, and that's what's enabling the invasion of these seedlings and the bramble and blackthorn. So essentially what I'm saying is, if you cleared the taller Holm Oaks down the slope, and you'd need climbing gear to do that, you'd open it up and expose it again to the sun and the wind, and that would knock back the seedling Holm Oaks, reduce their capacity to colonise. This is a new thing, this kind of invasion of Holm Oak along here. It's only happened in the last 20-30 years. Doesn't sound very new when I say it that way. But so prior to the kind of march of Holm Oaks in a kind of a westerly direction from Ventnor, prior to that, this would all have been open and windswept and kept open by the wind and by a few rabbits. So it's undeniable the rabbit population has certainly declined along here, so that has been one of the factors, but the main factor is just the shelter shading created by the Holm Oaks, opening up the grasslands, sheltering it, allowing the seedlings to get in. And we've also got this ivy spreading into the chalk grassland as well. Just creates a ground cover that totally destroys the grassland, and that's because of the humidity and the shelter created by this bank of Holm Oaks on the cliff face. This is crazy. None of this was here in the 90s, 2000s. This isn't rewilding, by the way. The invasion of non-native Holm Oaks destroying a tripolis eye is not rewilding, and if it is, then rewilding is disreputable in terms of nature conservation, but it isn't. I mean, I'm a rewilder and I can tell you this is not rewilding, this is incompetence. This is neglect of the crown jewels in terms of wildlife in England. Lovely anthills, yeah, this always used to be a superb section for anthills on this really parched, hot cliff top, but now it's just covered in scrub. Scrub is great. I've written a book about how to create lots more scrub, but not in tripolis-eyed chalk grassland like this, not to the extent that it completely destroys the features for which it is actually designated a site of special scientific interest. So the solution, work with the farmer, who's brilliant along here, really wants to do the right thing and owns the land, well, the inland bit. Whether he actually owns any of the cliff face, you'll have to look at the land registry, or have to look at his land ownership map. Either way, work with that farmer and work with Hampshire and Isle of Wight Wildlife Trust, who are really good. They've got a nature reserve just along here. And Natural England finds some resources to enable the farmer to get out the contractor he's already used along where we just walked, because he's already done a chunk of this work. So both Natural England and the farmer know and have already done some of the work that needs to be done. Continue that. It's lapsed a little bit. They've not done any for the last 2 or 3 years. You need an annual programme of probably clearing about 1 hectare a year, and after 5 or 6 years you'll have the job completely done. And in the longer term, to stop it just re-invading, I think by exposing it a bit, by dropping some of the canopy of the Holm Oaks down on the cliff face, by exposing the cliff top, the chalk grassland area a bit more, you will greatly reduce the capacity or the kind of the favourable conditions for Holm Oaks. So you'll reduce how good it is for Holm Oaks and reduce the invasion, but you will need to come back unless the rabbits. I mean, you know, we can't say that rabbits used to keep it under control, and since they've declined, it's got out of control because rabbits don't really nibble Holm Oaks. They leave it, and there are rabbits here, and you can see all the Holm Oaks. So it's not really down to the loss of rabbits. You can't blame them for the invasion of Holm Oaks. What it is that the Holm Oaks is working its way westwards from Ventnor towards Knighton, basically. So it's a pathway of invasion, gradually working its way west. So you need to knock it back, and it's going to be an ongoing management requirement. You need to treat the stumps, which I don't think was done with the last bit of work that was done. So you're effectively coppicing them if you don't treat the stumps, which is not going to do the job at all. You just have to keep coming back. So I think some might say, well, hang on a minute, you know, because of climate change, these species are going to be much more better fitted into the climate space that we end up with in this part of southern England anyway. So why not assist these non-native species, these Mediterranean Iberian species, to recolonise those ones that face dispersal limitation, so that they can then make up a kind of a much more viable plant community as the Mediterranean kind of climate spreads north, and it certainly will, you know. There's a particular paper which I'll drop a link to in the description, really good paper, really interesting, promoting or opening or reopening a debate about assisted colonisation. And that says, you know, that London, I think by 2040 will have a climate of Barcelona. Is it 2040, 2050? But it's pretty quickly. So, you know, you could argue, well, why not recognise that the climate is heating up, that our climate is going to be much more like the Mediterranean, and Iberia probably the Mediterranean overall, and therefore we should intervene, because there are species that are not so dispersal limited. So some of the invertebrates on the Holm Oak behind me, I'll drop in a little clip of that if I remember, that are living on the leaves, have colonised naturally, presumably they've come over the English Channel, and there'll be plenty of invertebrates that can do that, and plenty of other species. You know, some of the birds we had, you know, breeding beetles just a few kilometres over there a few years ago, highly successful. So some species are not quite so dispersal limited, so they will naturally spread up from the Mediterranean into the UK, and if they can establish themselves, they'll become part of the new native population, the kind of near-native as these authors describe them. The question is, should we be actually actively intervening to bring the dispersal limited species that can't get here of their own volition into southern England, such as Holm Oak? Holm Oak probably wouldn't naturally colonise its climate space in the UK as conditions here become better and better through time. So should we introduce species like Holm Oaks more widely across southern England into our native woodlands, because it will be better fitted to the climate than some of our, arguably, I'm not sure I totally agree with that, than some of our existing native species that are better suited to slightly cooler conditions. But what we got here is a mono-dominant stand of Holm Oak. Holm Oak's got to be a prime candidate for this assisted colonisation. And it's a bit of a nightmare because it's released from all the ecological, well, I don't know if this is true. I speculate that the reason it is doing so well here is that it's released to some extent from the ecological kind of constraints that would dampen its success somewhat here, and therefore open up space for a more diverse community. We've got a completely Holm Oak dominated stand over there, and that's how successful it is in places like this, like the Isle of Wight Undercliff. Underneath the Holm Oaks, early on when the canopy isn't quite closed, you get ivy that spreads all over the ground. The chalk grass and all goes completely. You get ivy, sheets of ivy. The sheets of ivy even disappear once the canopy properly closes over. And what you end up with is a complete closed canopy of Holm Oaks above and nothing below. So presumably quite an acidic leaf litter of Holm Oak leaves, which are very waxy, so they don't rot down very quick at all, and presumably the invertebrates, you know, the soil ecology isn't quite there to break them down properly rapidly as you might get in the Mediterranean. I don't know, I'm speculating here, I don't really know the Mediterranean Holm Oak type ecosystems well enough. So you end up with a closed canopy of Holm Oaks, deep shade, leaf litter of probably acidic, slightly acidic leaf litter, and nothing beneath. And that is literally true, so I'm not going to go up there now, so you won't see it in this video, but if you go underneath the canopy of those Holm Oaks, there is absolutely nothing. It's completely bare of, well, there's one orchid, can't remember what it is it autumn lady's tresses? There's one orchid that does grow underneath these Holm Oaks, and there's probably one or two other species, but it is basically barren. So I think, quite apart from natural England, as I said on the video clip I dropped in earlier, natural England has an urgent issue here because they're not on top of the Holm Oak invasion of chalk grassland. And I think those advocates of assisted colonisation have to answer the question, who is going to manage the consequences of introducing species like Holm Oak and other oak species, presumably cork oak, and you know, the various Mediterranean type oaks and other trees and shrubs that you might actively introduce? Who's going to be responsible for ensuring they don't turn into monodominant stands like that? I don't know if that's a natural feature. I don't know if Holm Oak, I think it probably does actually produce monodominant stands. I don't know about its burnability, so far, or its combustibility I mean, so far we've had no conflagration, so I assume that Holm Oak is resistant or resists fire, the canopy doesn't burn. So up on Ventnor Downs it's gravel caps, we've got chalk heath, lots of heather and lots of gorse, and we do get wildfires up there, and I bet they're going to increase. So I do worry that at some stage you're going to hit a tipping point, or you know, let some ecologists answer this question. Will we hit a tipping point whereby the combustibility of the canopies of Holm Oak suddenly increases and we get wildfires ripping through these monodominant stands of Holm Oaks? I'm assuming not, because that's not what's happened here in the Undercliff, despite the fact we do actually get wildfires in the gorse, which is right next to the Holm Oaks, just up on Ventnor Downs. So yeah, natural England, the message of this video really is that natural England needs to get to work sorting out the Holm Oak invasion of SAC and SSI chalk grassland throughout the Undercliff, and chalk kind of cliff faces throughout the Undercliff, because otherwise it's going to turn into a monodominant stands of Holm Oak, and that's all you'll have. And the people advocating for the assisted colonisation of non-native species such as Holm Oak, well, they don't say Holm Oak as far as I know, need to answer the question of what happens with ecological release if these species are so successful but so impoverished that we end up with very species poor stands such as we got here in Ventnor. And another key point I just want to make is that in the paper that I'm going to cite at the end of this, the authors, who are really good conservation scientists by the way, so I'm not casting shade over them as the Americans would say, but they don't really address island biogeography to any great extent, and kind of distinctiveness of the plant and animal communities we have in the UK. Yes, they are naturally impoverished because of the cutting off the land bridge in the early Holocene kind of slowed down the colonisation of dispersal limited species. But that is nature, you know, that is island biogeography, which is a key pattern in ecology and global biogeography that we should respect and treasure and kind of take account of. It's not just about ecological complexity and ecological function, it's also about ecological distinctiveness and patterns in the distribution of plants and animals, i.e. biogeography. And here we have island biogeography. We are slightly impoverished, but that's a natural phenomenon. We're even more impoverished because we're wrecking the countryside. So I would suggest my current position, it may well change, because I like Iberian lynx and I'd love to see those in Breckland, but so it may well change. But my current position is what we actually need to do is to build resilience across the landscape. We need to make, as Lawton said, we need to make habitats in good condition. They're much bigger, much more interconnected. We need to make river systems much more complete, which means more beavers everywhere so that they can re-wet and reconnect rivers and their floodplains. And I suspect that we will be surprised about how robust habitats that are in decent condition are, and how, yes, they will change, and they'll change pretty dramatically. They're already beginning to change. But it doesn't mean to say we'll get widespread extinctions. We'll get widespread change and widespread reshuffling of ecological communities. But they may prove to be more kind of adaptive and not resilient so much, but adaptive than we think. So I hope you're enjoying this video about Ventnor and the Undercliff. If so, then don't forget there are 2 books that I've written. One, Bird Watching Around Ventnor, creatively named, and the second one is Wildlife Watching Around Ventnor. Just short books about the local area that are the subject of this video. Available on Amazon. I'll put a link below for this video, and you can also order it from the library, and it's available in all major bookshops, both of these little booklets, and in a few shops along the Esplanade, like the Longshoremen's Museum and Lady Scarlett's Tea Room as well. But yeah, I'll put a link to the description if you want a slightly deeper dive into the Isle of Wight Undercliff. Then these 2 little booklets might be of interest to you. Just go onto Amazon otherwise and just search for Steve Jones and Ventnor, and you should find them.